How could I have guessed that one tiny, seemingly unimportant moment would flip my entire life upside down? It was just another boring day, the kind where you don't expect anything out of the ordinary. But then, I walked into that room. Honestly, I hadn't even planned to go up there. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I noticed the door to Liam's room was slightly open, just a crack, enough to let a thin beam of light spill into the hallway. That little gap made me stop for a second. Something about it felt off. Like the air had shifted, and some part of me knew this wasn't going to be just another ordinary moment. I could have walked away, brushed it off, and gone about my day. But I didn't. Something pushed me forward, some weird force I couldn't explain. As I got closer, the sounds grew louder, but I still couldn't figure out what they were. What was it about that door, that sliver of light, that felt so heavy, like it was hiding something huge on the other side? Liam was upstairs alone. Ethan was at work, and the house was dead quiet, too quiet. At first, the faint noises from upstairs seemed normal, just the muffled sounds of a guy lost in his own world, probably wrapped up in whatever was on his mind. But then I thought, maybe I should check on him. Maybe offer him a coffee, have a little chat, you know? Break up the silence. The idea of a simple conversation felt comforting, like it might bridge the gap between the quiet house and the chaos of the day. When I reached the top of the stairs, the sounds became clearer. I tried to figure out where they were coming from, my eyes naturally landing on his door. It was open just a crack, a sliver that felt like either an invitation or a warning. My heart skipped, and I hesitated, sensing something wasn't right. But still, I took that last step, drawn to the threshold like a moth to a flame. I paused for a second, took a deep breath, and was about to call out his name, ready to do what I'd planned. But then something caught my attention, something I couldn't ignore. Liam was sitting on his bed, his laptop open on his lap, the screen casting a sharp, almost ghostly light across his face. His fingers were flying over the keyboard, and at first, I thought he was just watching something, maybe an action movie or one of those endless videos he'd get sucked into for hours. I almost smiled, thinking it was just another harmless distraction. But then, as I stepped closer, my angle changed just enough for me to see past the glow of the screen. That's when my whole body went cold. My blood felt like ice, and a wave of dizziness hit me. My vision narrowed as the horrifying truth hit me like a punch to the gut. The reflection on the screen was unmistakable, too clear, too real. This wasn't just some mindless entertainment. No, this was something else entirely. Something I wasn't ready for. Something that didn't belong in the quiet little world I thought I knew. Liam froze, his eyes snapping to mine in a flash of panic. His face went pale, and his hands flew to the keyboard, frantically trying to minimize whatever was on the screen. But it was too late. The damage was done. Our eyes met, and I saw the shame in his gaze. His cheeks turned bright red, that kind of deep, burning embarrassment that says more than words ever could. It wasn't just guilt, it was the kind of shame that cuts you to the core, the kind that feels like a weight you can't escape. I'm sorry, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper as he looked away, too ashamed to face me. His words didn't even register at first. The room felt too quiet, too heavy, and I was stuck there, frozen, my mind racing with 1,000 questions that didn't make sense. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My feet felt glued to the floor. The door, I muttered, or at least I think I did. The words didn't feel like mine, like they came from some part of me that was just as lost as I felt. I was trying to make sense of what had just happened, trying to explain it, to make it okay somehow. But nothing made sense. A warmth spread through me, but it wasn't the warmth of understanding or compassion. It was the heat of humiliation, realizing I'd seen something I was never supposed to see. I stumbled back, turning toward the hallway, my breath shallow, my heart pounding in my chest. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to steady myself, to keep from falling apart. What the hell was that? I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. But I wasn't sure if the question was for Liam or for me. What had I just walked into? What had I just witnessed? My mind was spinning. What had I done? Why had I been so careless, so unaware? How had I let myself get drawn into that room? But was I the only one to blame here? The question hung in the air, unanswered, because I didn't know anymore. I didn't know where the blame really lay, if there even was such a thing as blame in a moment like this. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. Stop it, Maggie, I told myself sharply. But the chaos inside me wasn't just about what I'd seen. Liam was 23 now, not a kid anymore. But I was 47, a woman who'd had her fair share of shame in life. I'd never been in a situation like this before, but I knew exactly what shame felt like. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart still racing. I ran my fingers through my hair, trying to pull myself together. Then Liam appeared in the doorway. He adjusted his collar, cleared his throat, and kept his eyes down. Maggie, I'm sorry. I thought I'd closed the door, he said, his voice shaky but sincere. I quickly shook my head, looking away. No. I should be the one apologizing. I should have knocked before barging in, I said quickly, not knowing what else to say. Silence followed, but this wasn't just any silence. We'd lived under the same roof for years, but this was the first time we'd ever looked at each other like this. The tension between us was thick, heavy, and impossible to ignore. I should head downstairs and start dinner, I added, my voice shaky as I turned toward the stairs, trying to hold myself together. Liam didn't say a word. He just watched me, his eyes following me like he was trying to figure something out in his head. Before things really started heating up between Liam and me, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications, and stick around until the end. I promise, things are about to get really interesting. That evening, we didn't exchange a single word. No texts, no eye contact, not even small talk. But that silence? It screamed louder than any words could. It told me things would never be the same again. At dinner, we sat at the same table, but we couldn't look at each other. The only sound was the clinking of forks against plates. We both knew we needed to talk, to ease the tension, but how? The night passed, then the next day, and the one after that. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but it wasn't. The silence only made the invisible wall between us grow taller, stronger. Then, one afternoon, Liam sat down next to me. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, but it was clear he wanted to fix things. Maggie, he started, his voice nervous but sincere, about the other day. I'm really embarrassed. I'm sorry. I didn't want things to be this way. Please, I don't want this to ruin things between us. I took a deep breath. No matter how strange and unexpected this was, I needed to put him at ease. I forced a smile, shrugged slightly, and said, "Oh, Liam, believe me, I've had my fair share of embarrassing moments over the years." Then I shared a few of those moments with him. His smile relaxed a little, and he nodded, his embarrassment fading slightly. For a moment, it seemed like the tension between us had lifted. But deep down, I knew nothing had truly been resolved. Even though things seemed better, this conversation had erased the boundaries between us, and I could feel it. Things were about to go much, much further. Liam let out a small chuckle, lowering his gaze to the table. "I guess we're even now," he said quietly. I frowned slightly and turned to him. "What do you mean?" I asked, curiosity creeping into my voice. For a second, his expression shifted, like he'd just realized he'd said something he couldn't take back. He rubbed the back of his neck, hesitating for a moment, but he'd already started, and now he had no choice but to continue. He took a deep breath, then looked away as he muttered, "I've seen you, the same way. You just didn't know about it." It felt like electricity shot through my body. I froze. "What?" I whispered, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Liam's face was flushed, but he kept going. "I never told you because I was too embarrassed, but I never forgot about it. Actually, it was my little secret, something I couldn't get out of my head." My heart was pounding wildly, a strange warmth spreading through me. That sensation told me something had changed. Liam's words weren't just a confession, they shattered every last boundary between us. I looked at him. He was looking at me too, and by now, we both knew this wasn't just an ordinary conversation. The air in the room had thickened. Everything had shifted. From that day on, everything changed. There had always been a distance between us before, an invisible line that kept us apart. But now, it felt like that line had completely vanished. Without even realizing it, I'd started spending so much more time with Liam. Small moments, seemingly insignificant conversations, but in reality, each one only fueled the tension between us. Now, we even sat and watched movies together. Before, we'd always keep our distance, but now there was an unspoken pull between us, something we both felt but never acknowledged. Sometimes, when Liam rested his arm on the couch, when my hand brushed against his leg, or when our laughter intertwined, I felt something strange inside me. But I tried not to think about it. One night, I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing and turning, but the restlessness inside me wouldn't let me be. There was only one thing on my mind, Liam. This couldn't go on. I needed to set a boundary. If he had feelings for me, I had to say it outright and put a stop to it. With that thought, I got out of bed. My heart was pounding like crazy, but my feet had already carried me to Liam's room. His door was slightly open, and the dim light inside faintly illuminated the room. As I stepped inside, I saw him. He was sleeping, but at that moment, my eyes weren't on him. They were fixed on something else, something big. My breath caught. My body froze. Seeing him like that sent a storm raging inside me. I shouldn't have seen it. I should have turned around immediately, but I didn't. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to understand what I was feeling. Then I quickly pulled back. There was something inside me that I couldn't suppress, but I had to ignore it. I returned to my room, lay down, but nothing was the same anymore. That night, I had no idea how much more complicated things would become. No matter what I did, I couldn't resist this growing closeness with Liam. With each passing day, the boundaries blurred even more, and the pull between us only got stronger. I didn't even realize when things had gone this far, but the one thing I knew was that turning back was becoming impossible. And then Liam came home like that. He was drunk. The noise from the door when he arrived barely registered, but when I saw him, something clicked. His eyes were unfocused. He couldn't stand straight. The smell of alcohol clung to him. He reached out to me, stumbling. "Help me," he muttered. But something in me froze. I wanted to help him, but not in the way I'd imagined. Not in the way I used to think I would. I studied him as best as I could, but the closer we got, the more my body reacted in a way I hadn't expected, and wasn't ready for. He wasn't ready either. We were both teetering on the edge of a line we shouldn't cross. We stood there, the tension between us thickening with every passing second. In a fleeting, almost imperceptible moment, our eyes met. Just a brief, accidental glance, yet it lingered in the air like the first drop of rain before a storm. It was so subtle, but I could feel it, as if our souls had brushed against each other without our bodies even moving. And then, as quickly as it had come, it was gone. But I knew it wouldn't be forgotten. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking things like I always did. But I couldn't help it. I knew, just as you do, that it would cross my mind again when the world quieted down at night, when the moonlight became the only witness to our unspoken truths. A shiver ran down my spine, involuntary, a reflex that betrayed me completely. I stepped back, but it was a half-hearted attempt. My feet felt rooted to the floor, unwilling to move, trapped in some unspoken understanding. "Liam," I said, the words stumbling from my lips, thick with uncertainty and fear. "This isn't right." The tremor in my voice betrayed my attempt at defiance, a thin veil over the truth I didn't want to acknowledge. But Liam didn't flinch. His smile was small, but there was something in it, a knowingness, a quiet confidence, as if he'd long since passed the point of questioning what was right or wrong. I could see it in his eyes, in the way his lips curved. He'd already made up his mind. "Maggie," he said, his voice soft yet insistent. "Stop lying to yourself." He took a step closer, then another, and I couldn't bring myself to step away. His presence consumed the space between us, erasing any trace of distance. He was so close now that I could feel his breath, warm and steady, grazing against my skin. It was intimate, too intimate, and yet I couldn't move. His fingers lifted almost of their own accord, brushing softly across my cheek. Every part of me screamed to look away, to break the connection, but I didn't. I couldn't. I didn't want to. Somewhere deep down, I knew he was right, even though I wasn't ready to admit it. Even though every rational part of me screamed to stop. And just like that, the world seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was holding its breath in anticipation. Then, before I could gather the strength to protest, his lips were on mine. The world fell away. The silence, the weight of every unsaid word, every unsent thought, every question that had been hanging between us for days, weeks, maybe even longer, all of it was swallowed up by that single moment. His kiss was everything, an answer, a question, a conclusion, and a beginning, all wrapped in one. In that fleeting instant, the noise in my mind quieted. The doubts I'd carried for so long were no longer louder than the beating of my own heart. They faded into the background, whispering softly like forgotten echoes. My hands trembled, but they didn't retreat. My body felt like it was no longer my own, it was his as much as it was mine. When I looked into Liam's eyes, there was a clarity there, something raw and unyielding that made every ounce of resistance crumble. There was no point in pretending anymore, no point in hiding from the truth we both knew but had been too afraid to face. I swallowed the lump in my throat, thick and unrelenting, and took a steadying breath. Slowly, deliberately, I let my hands slide up to my shoulders, slipping the straps of my clothing down, one small movement at a time. It felt like I was peeling away the last layers of pretense, the last defenses I had left. When I spoke, my voice was barely a whisper, barely audible, but it carried all the weight of everything I'd been trying to avoid. "You're right, Liam," I murmured, the words slipping out with the finality of a door closing. "Let's not play this game any longer." In that moment, I knew there was no going back. Closing the gap between us, I finally laid back on the bed, feeling the coolness of the sheets beneath me as the weight of the moment settled in. My heart was racing in my chest, each beat thundering through my veins. Yet, in that moment, retreating wasn't even a thought. Turning back was no longer an option. Liam, moving with slow deliberation, leaned over me, his gaze locked onto mine for a brief, almost tangible moment before a smile slowly spread across his face, softening the intensity of the situation. "Don't be afraid," he murmured, his voice low, warm, and surprisingly reassuring. The words wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. "Everything is right." I couldn't bring myself to meet his gaze any longer. My eyes darted away involuntarily, a shiver crawling down my spine, unsettling my nerves. Deep down, beneath the surface of my fear and confusion, I knew how long I'd been waiting for this exact moment to arrive. But despite the pull of desire and the undeniable truth that this was what I'd longed for, I couldn't suppress the unease within me. The words, unbidden, slipped from my lips, betraying my vulnerability. "Liam. I'm a little scared," I confessed, my breath coming in uneven bursts, trembling with both excitement and uncertainty. The weight of 1,000 thoughts pressed against me, and in that moment, I couldn't stop myself from speaking my truth. He didn't flinch at my words. Instead, a playful smile tugged at his lips, as though my fear only heightened his sense of control, or maybe he found some sort of reassurance in my hesitation. Perhaps it was the alcohol clouding his senses, or maybe it was the intensity of the moment itself, but Liam's attention didn't waver from me. Leaning down, he whispered in my ear, the words barely audible but heavy with meaning, "Ethan mustn't wake up." The meaning was clear, and it brought with it a strange new wave of tension. We needed to be quiet. Careful. I understood the gravity of what was being asked. A flood of emotions washed over me, something vast and overpowering stirring inside. I had to keep myself in check, fighting against the instinct to let out the sounds of a body caught between fear, desire, and something deeper I couldn't quite name. Liam's gaze softened, his voice steady as he reassured me, "I know, darling. Everything is great. And so are you." What did he know in that moment? I wasn't sure what he understood, but his confidence, the certainty with which he spoke, made me feel like he was seeing through me, like he could read every hidden part of me, every unspoken need. I couldn't hold back any longer. My eyelids fluttered closed, my body betraying me as I gripped the sheets tightly in my hands, my body quaking beneath the overwhelming sensation. A sudden wave of heat surged through me, but I clamped my hand over my mouth, doing everything